Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the January board meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board. And it is a very full agenda today. Let me start, first of all, with the declaration of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Any colleagues, any conflict of interest to declare? Okay, hearing none. As everybody knows, at the first meeting of the new year, the calendar year, we elect a chair and a vice chair. May I have, sorry, Deirdre, do you have some statutory stuff you need to read?
Yes.
Oh, good, okay.
Just read a little bit of that. This is the first meeting in the new year. Therefore, in accordance with subsection 28(1) of the Police Services Act, which provides that the board shall elect a chair at its first meeting in each year, nominations for the position of chair will now be accepted.
It's my great pleasure to nominate Mr. Andy Pringle to continue as the chair.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to second that motion.
Thank you. Mr. Pringle, do you agree to be nominated? I do. Thank you. Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, nominations will be closed. Dr. Noria has nominated Mr. Pringle, which was seconded by Ms. Molliner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. There being only one nomination for the office of chair, Mr. Pringle is declared elected chair of the board for the year 2017 and until his successor is appointed. The board will now elect a vice chair in accordance with subsection 28(2) of the Police Services Act. The vice chair shall act as the chair if the chair is absent or if the chair's position is vacant. Nominations for the position of vice chair will now be accepted.
Mr. Chair, I am very pleased to nominate Councillor Chin Lee as Vice Chair of the Police Commission for 2017.
Thank you. Would someone like to second that nomination? Thank you. Councillor Lee, do you agree to be nominated?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, nominations will be closed. Mayor Tory has nominated Councillor Lee, which was seconded by Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. There being only one nomination for the office of Vice Chair, Councillor Lee is declared elected Vice Chair of the Board for the year 2017 and until his successor is appointed.
Thank you. Let me just ask, item number 3 is confirmation of the minutes from the meeting held on December 19th, 2016. May I have a motion to approve? Ms. Molnar, seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 4 is the Transformational Task Force report. We'll be having a presentation and a couple of depositions. Reports to receive. The council member midterm appointments. Item number 5, motion to receive. Mayor Tory, seconded Ms. Molnar. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Congratulations, Councillor Lee and Councillor Carroll. The item number 6, paid duty rates, January 1st, 2017. Motion to receive. Ms. Molnar, seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 7, the Chief's Administrative Investigation into Custody Industries of Horatio Burke. Motion to receive. Ms. Molnar, Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 8, response to the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition's recommendation. There is a written submission, but which is in your diligent or you have received. So a motion to receive. Ms. Molnar, Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 9, the minutes from the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee meeting held on November 14th, 2016. Motion to receive. Mayor Tory, seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 10 is a response to the jury recommendations from the coroner's inquest into the death of Kayla and Angel Sampson. Motion to approve. Dr. Nuria, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 11, the inquest in the death of David Andrew Doucette, verdict and recommendations of the jury. Motion to approve. Ms. Mulliner, Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 12, the request for review of complaint investigation pertaining to a service provided by the Toronto Police Services. There is a motion on the screen. Okay. That with respect, so the board received the complaint summarized in a report that respective recommendation number 2, the board concur with the chief's decision that no further action be taken with respect to the complaint, the reasons set out in the chief's report, and given that the board is satisfied that the service were provided and that the complaint of the Toronto Police Services were appropriate, and 3, that the board approve recommendation number 3. I said, what does all that mean? In the chief's report. Okay. Does anybody want to discuss this, or can we have a motion to accept that? Ms. Mulliner, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Okay. So that was item number 12. So item number 13. Okay. Item number 14, the special constable appointments. This is a motion to approve. Mayor Tory, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 15 is to approve with the amendment on the screen. There are 11 appointees to the Toronto Community Housing Corporation and 3 reappointees to the U of T. Okay. So you can see that it was transposed incorrectly in your report. So with that amendment, may we have a motion to approve? Dr. Nuria, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 16 is held for deputation. Item number 17, the City of Toronto Council decision sharing between Community Housing Corporation and Toronto Police Services of information. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 18, again, City of Toronto Council decision, the powers of the Chief of Police to approve the properties from removal of parked vehicles. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 19, City of Toronto Council decision, mitigation strategies to address projected year-end over expenditures. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I want to go back to item 8 because I failed to point out there was a question in the TPS use of the internet procedure written submission from Mr. Sewell that
Right.
probably could be answered and perhaps
Okay, we'll
can hold that one.
We'll come
Thank
back to
you.
it, sure. Thank you. So let me set up, we'll do now the presentation of the Transformational Task Force, and we just remind people of the background that we had a discussion at the December 2015 board meeting of the most recent report about suggestions for police change. We struck at that meeting the Transformational Task Force with the vision to respond with an interim report in June and a final report in this month. We put together a transformational team. It is in your report. It was in the interim report issued in June of 7 people from the service and 7 people broadly based from the community. I would ask you to take a look at those names in the back, because that group, the Transformational Task Force, has done some extraordinary work. And I might particularly mention the externals who were volunteers, many of them with, not all of them with very significant positions. They gave hundreds and hundreds of hours of their time and their experience and their guidance. Everybody made significant and critical contributions to our discussions. We had a number of outside consultants as well. One of them, Sam Goodwin, is here, and Sam, thank you for all that you did in bringing all the information together. So I think we've been extraordinarily well served by this group, both the men and women in the service and the external advisors, members of the task force. And I would strongly advise you just to take a look at that. We owe them all, I think, a significant vote of thanks. This report is just being presented now. The last 2 members of the Transformational Task Force, Michelle DiEmanuele, who is the CEO of the Trillium Health Network and a critical member of the task force team, and Staff Sergeant Greg Watts, also a leading member of the team, to present to us and take us through that. But I would say that the focus now is for us to receive this report. It's this board that commissioned it. The chief and I co-chaired it. We now will have it presented to us. There are a few depositions, as you can see, on the board. And but then I would propose, with a brief discussion, questions that board members may have of the 2 presenting task force members. Then we hold the report for the February board meeting, so the public has a full 3 and a bit weeks to digest what's a very significant document, and then make depositions at the February board meeting. So with that background, and particularly with those thanks, Mark, is there anything you want to add to my comments before we ask Michelle and Greg to come and present to us?
No, Chair. I do echo the great respect and appreciation for the members of the task force. It was a daunting task, to say the least. And it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns, I can tell you that much as well, too. But especially to our externals who really put in, like you said, those hundreds of hours of their own time to help make the city of Toronto a great city. So I do thank everyone that was involved in it. I am excited about the opportunity of implementing it, and looking forward to moving forward.
Michelle, Greg? Now that you're both sitting down, let me thank you not only for all the leadership and work that you both did on the task force, but you have been presenting all day here. Michelle, I know you have other important duties, so thank you so much for taking the time to be here and present. And I would say, because I see most of the task force members here, thank you very much for coming as well. So, Greg and Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, wow. A year later, this has been quite a journey that we've been on, and I think one of the things I'd like to say at the beginning is to remember that we're tabling the final part of really what is a 2-set report, the interim report and this report, and they do really work quite complementary together, so I would just remind everybody of that. I think it's fair to say when we brought the roadmap out and we began the consultation process, it didn't take very long to realize there was really quite unprecedented alignment with respect to the general direction and the general way forward. And that presented us with a real opportunity to spend the bulk of the last several months really thinking about the most important burning question that we heard during the consultation process after we got that sense of alignment was, are we really going to do this? The proof is in the pudding. Implementation matters. And so with that, you will see that this report really does have a really important focus on the implementation and the conditions for successful implementation as we move forward. Secondly, the cultural component to this report has been, again, a number of voices have echoed that real importance for cultural change. And you will see that the report is written not to mandate cultural change, but to enable it. And so when you look at the middle part where we're describing the new service model and the role of policing, et cetera, you will see that it really talks about a from to, but not in the traditional sense, where you see a chart that sort of says, here's where we are and here's where we're going, but a real articulation, a dialogue, a description of how it works today and how it should work in the future, and that sense of movement and progress. And the third part that we focused on as we tied this all together was really around accountability, transparency, and being able to chart progress. We heard that time and time again in our consultations. And so much of this report really does focus on an ability to track progress and to monitor progress and to have effective oversight around the modernization agenda. And frankly, not just for the implementation of this report, but just for the service in general. So as we started our second phase of work, this guided us, but those three components really came out of the consultation process. So Greg and I are going to focus on three areas of the report. We'll talk about what we heard and the themes through that. We're going to talk about the additional work that the task force took on that deepened our understanding and also resulted in some additional recommendations. And then thirdly, we're going to focus on that implementation component. I do want to just draw your attention to the one area of further work. We've realized $40 million of the $100 million that was in this report. There's also a component of this report that talks about the importance of just continued optimization and efficiencies that can be harvested and then reinvested into modernization. And the chief has already begun to think about that. As well, we reviewed a number of areas through requests for proposal and information in the private and broader public sector for alternative service delivery ideas. And you'll remember in the first report, we said we believed that there were additional savings beyond the $100 million. And in fact, in this report, we believe that those early investigations on our part around alternative service delivery actually do indicate there in fact could be more savings as we move forward.
So once we tabled the interim report in June, the task force then went on an intense community consultation and engagement process. We covered the entire city. We spoke to the people of the City of Toronto in a different way than we have in the past. The focus on this strategy was really to get a dialogue back and forth between the residents of our city and the members of the task force and the police in general. In the past, it would be a typical town hall setting where we would be dictating what we're doing, and we changed that process in this regard, and we actually heard a lot of great things. We heard that the public wanted to be closer to the police. We heard that the public wants to see the police as part of their neighborhood, and not just in an enforcement capacity. They want to know who their officers are, build long-term relationships with them, and really increase the familiarity between local officers and the residents that live there. We also heard that the public wants the police to be held more accountable, not just on a corporate level, but on a day-to-day level as well. And they want the police to be less reactive and to spend a lot more time on preventative efforts and strategies, again, to solve local problems. When we started the conversation with our internal members, we were actually really overwhelmed by the desire to change. There was a strong desire to change and a stronger desire to be engaged and consulted as we go through implementing this action plan. The members of our service, both sworn and civilian, will be carrying this plan forward, and they want to be a part of it, and they should be a part of it. But there was also some healthy skepticism about achieving a new model of policing, considering all of the previous reviews that have been done in the past. It's clear that we have a very proud service. They want to be the best. They want their voice to be heard as we move forward. So based on what we heard from both the public and our internal conversations with our members and the work that the task force has done over the past year, we've identified some additional recommendations above that was mentioned in the interim report. I'm going to speak to a few of them, and then Michelle is going to speak to a few more. So really, the first few recommendations are all about continuing the dialogue. We've got great momentum based on what we've done with the community engagement, and we need to build on that. We need to develop strategies that engage the public in new and innovative ways that really push, again, the dialogue, the back and forth dialogue. And then we really need to engage our service in, again, new ways. Interesting enough that over the next 2 weeks, members of our service, both part of the task force and within strategy management, will be continuing a 2-week intense engagement and consultation process. We will be visiting every single platoon, every division, every unit within our service to get their voice and start that dialogue. And we've never done that before, so it's an exciting time. There's also recommendations that speak about the need for the service and the board to engage and consult with the Toronto Police Association and the Senior Officers Organization. They represent the membership of our service and therefore play a crucial role in the implementation of this action plan. I've mentioned that the public really talked about accountability, but we also heard that from the internal members as well. There was a strong sense that we needed to be accountable in different ways. So the task force spent a lot of time on that, which is indicated by recommendation 28. But I'm going to speak to it in terms of what modern policing looks like. So when we talk about modern policing and the term accountability, we really took a deep dive into it, and we had to look past government bodies, legislation, and policies that are already in place. Because we have a few realities. And one of those realities is that the Honorable Justice Tulloch is currently reviewing the 3 oversight bodies. So the Special Investigations Unit, the Office of the Independent Review Director, and the Ontario Civilian Police Commission. Our chief and chair have had formal input into this process, and we're really looking forward to hearing those findings because we really think it'll add new opportunities. Our other reality is that every police officer is governed by the Police Services Act. In it, there is a duty to report misconduct, which compels every officer to do that. But when you take a step further and you think about the term accountability, there's one thing in common that both of those realities have, and that's something has already happened. We've realized that we need to be a lot more proactive in our operational frontline work, but we also need to adopt this mentality with our people. Because up and until an oversight body or legislation kicks in, we own it. All the members own it. So we need to be accountable to each other, to support one another in times of personal and professional need, and the leaders in our organization will need to be accountable to those that work for them, to support them in their work, and to set them up for success. This is the crux of recommendation 28, that the service explore awareness training, that members can identify times when coworkers need support, enhanced supervisor training and guidance for team development, implementing 360-degree evaluations for leaders so that they can understand how their leadership style and actions affect people, and being accountable to the public in new and more transparent ways that Michelle's going to talk about in a second. So then, what does an actual new model of policing look like? So in June, when we sat in front of you, we spoke that our current policing model is outdated, it's reactive. Our city today looks very different than it looked 20 years ago, yet our model of policing has remained the same. So we took a blank page approach right from the start. Took into consideration the vision, the roadmap, our principles, and our goals, and we filled that blank page with the way forward that changes the model of policing drastically. And at the center of that new model sits the neighborhoods of the City of Toronto. Our focus is to deliver service in ways that help people strengthen their relationships with our communities and help officers do what they want to do, which is help people. And it may look actually like a step back in time when officers primarily walked the beat. They knew everybody in the community. They just knew what was going on. Well, it worked then, and we think it'll work again. And as technology took us out of the communities, it's now putting us right back in. It's allowing us to be smarter, to use data better, to collaborate better, and to empower our officers to do their job. And it's important to note that this is a bit of an unprecedented journey that we've taken place in regards to the task force. We've got members of the service with a lot of knowledge and experience partnered with public and private sector leaders who have done this type of transformation in the past. So seeing that synergy take place of policing knowledge and experience with a business lens was actually pretty fantastic. And I'm going to ask Michelle to talk about that.
So one of the things that you'll see in the report is a real emphasis on what traditionally people call back office, but it really is the enabling office. It's that part that allows that front line to be able to deliver with a reliability each and every day. And so if you take human resource management, for instance, so much of what we saw as we were working through this process was really strong personnel management, whether it was making sure people get paid on time, or there's appropriate hiring practices, or there is the appropriate performance management systems. But in this day and age, in modern organizations, you don't talk about personnel management anymore. You talk about human capital. You talk about the people proposition. And so when you think about the new model, it means that some of those other models that support it have to change. And so this report builds that out. And in the area of human resource management, as an example, thinking about how that would be both a framework would be developed, but also structures would change so that that frontline leader in the community managing teams of people has that expertise right next to them as they're taking training and actually putting it into action. And so that's part of putting that business lens or really an enabling lens to change and to transformation and modernization on the table.
So now I'm going to go into a quick view of what the new model is going to encompass. And like I said, at the center of the new model is the City of Toronto neighborhoods, which means that our neighborhood officer program of the future will look very different than what it looks like today. This graphic is meant to kind of illustrate a from-to situation. And the reality of today is that the public is forced to succumb to the system, meaning that in many cases they have to navigate the service on their own, even after being initially involved in something. In the future, the neighborhood officer will be their gateway to policing services. And by connecting that officer, they'll have everything at their fingertips and be empowered to assist people and solve problems on a local level. Simply put, the system will work for the public. Officers will be embedded in all neighborhoods for years, not months. That's one thing that was very clear in the public consultations, was that in the policing culture, 6 months, there's always change, there's always movement. And they wanted sustainable officers. They wanted to know their officers and not just get to know an officer and then have that officer moved. So we've listened. Brand new officers will start their careers in neighborhoods, working with experienced officers on foot and on bike, building a foundation in community policing before they go anywhere else. We've also heard the term from primary to priority response, and it might sound like a play on words, but it's actually a drastic change in the way we handle our calls for service. And building on the neighborhood officer, that's got to change. Currently, we ask our primary response officers to attend all types of calls, regardless of what the level of emergency. Something from a break and enter in progress to a landlord and tenant dispute. And then we ask them to handle that call in its entirety from start to finish. And this can take hours to do. Taking statements, evidence collection, crime scene management, report submission. There's a lot to do. And it's exactly why the term call to call is thrown around so often, because the current model is reactive. And as the service has adopted the many non-emergency calls that we go to, it's simply not sustainable, it's not healthy for our members, and it does not provide the best service to the public. But the move from primary to priority is grounded in a few musts. The first being that we as a service need to redefine what the police are responsible for. We've partnered with the City of Toronto in this regard, and it's actually a really exciting time to see these conversations take place. We've invited the city in to our implementation team, and they will be embedding somebody on our team to move this modernization agenda forward. And the second must is that we need to be smarter with how we deal with situations and our deployment of officers. The delineation of roles within our service will allow for a complement of officers to provide an initial response to any and all emergency situations, whilst having other officers and civilian members available to provide investigative and community support. Adding the neighborhood officers to that list only bolsters our ability to provide service at both the front and back end of investigations. And finally, in this regard, it's important to note that the task force has been comprised of service members, including our chief, who have brought their experiences, knowledge, and desire to progress to the table. And we would never put forward a plan that would put our residents or officers at risk. This move to priority response will not only allow for better, more efficient service delivery, but it makes sense for our people as well. It takes that concept of teamwork to an entirely new level.
The next series of recommendations contained in this part of the report really deal with three areas. One is governance, the other one is just the implementation theme that I've already mentioned, and the third is really about accountability and progress measurement. And so recommendation number 29 recognizes that this is really a complex and very systemic change that is very much a plan in a package. And with that comes obviously challenges as you're implementing. And we felt that the kind of advice that the task force had benefited from throughout our journey would be advice that would be very beneficial to the board as they now continue the journey ahead. And so we have recommended an independent advisor to the board, particularly with change management expertise and somebody who has done this. And you can call upon to get advice from time to time. The next recommendation really deals with that comprehensive HR strategy I spoke about, and really ensuring that the HR and people needs are aligned in such a way as to help advance the model. For example, when Greg just spoke about the role of the officer, just even the picture there illustrated that many roles that somebody can play, and in fact that makes this a much more, I think, attractive organization in the years to come when there's that kind of variety of work underway. But that also requires thinking about how you make that change, how you recruit with new competencies, how you evaluate that, and how you performance management that. And again, that frontline delivery being supported, that frontline leader being supported with the expertise they will need around the most valuable resource we have, the people who deliver the service. The next two recommendations really deal with reporting and accountability. And you'll see at the back end of the report, we've taken our first initial cut at what that could look like. And we would like to see that as a benchmark, but that can evolve over time as well, and should evolve over time as the service evolves. And I'll talk about that further as we go. And so, again, starting with human resources, we did spend a great deal of time this last couple of months really turning our attention now to implementation. And so we did commission some initial work on building a human resource strategy and also on looking at how that could be structured to meet the spirit of the model as we knew it today. And so that work is underway, and Tony has been leading that and his team. And so we're very encouraged by the acceptance of the importance of that as we move forward. As well, the talent management strategy, which we spoke about, which needs to be housed in a broader people strategy, again, has commenced, and the team has been working through some of the early thinking on that. In information and information technology, as we began to delve into those conditions for successful implementation, it did become apparent to us, and And frankly, because the service members themselves shared some of their frustrations around that technology alignment, we have done a first level look at technology, and we believe there are some changes that can be made around the governance of it, the alignment of architecture and application, and how that can be used to enable that new model of policing, and in particular, how mobile operations can truly be effective, not just a device for purchasing. And that's a really important component. And I've spoken about this a couple of times today. If we think about our homes and we think about the fact that we plug things into usually something that has two prongs, and if we get really good at technology, we might buy a power bar, which gets 4 or 5. We need a new power bar. If we are going to have a policing model that truly enables that connectivity, and that police officer has available to them multiple channels of both information and tools, that's going to have a robust I&IT strategy behind it. And so this report has started to work through the kind of progression and planning that needs to take place. Whenever one changes an organization, you have to always look at the foundational policies and practices. And so, although there's not a recommendation contained in there, I can assure you that is embedded in all of the thinking the team has been working on as they look at changing a model. What are the policies and practices that need to underpin it for sustainability? And so that work has also begun, whether it's on the model, new boundaries, or on the future community policing station. Lastly, I want to speak a little bit about structure and capacity. As I said, one of the things we heard time and time again, is this going to happen? And one of the ways we believe we've helped assure this happening is to ensure that it is not on everybody's corner of desk, that there is a dedicated, capable, passionate team driving results, working with leadership to do so each and every day. And over the last couple of months, the chief has appointed a strategy management office directly reporting to him. They have been bringing members into that fold with key roles and key accountabilities for driving various recommendations. And where there was a gap, those gaps are beginning to be filled in the area of communications in particular, in the area of project management when you have a number of different activities going on. This is not a linear approach. This is a multifaceted approach, and you need somebody to keep track of that for you and to ensure that you are aligning this consistently, and project management is the best tool to do so. And so that's been built in. And I can tell you ownership is already occurring. And as the task force has been winding down and writing the final report, there has been a filling of that void by the strategy management office and the teams that they are beginning to build. And so we feel very confident that that transition from thinking to planning to action will be effective. And I can say the external members have a high level of confidence in that regard. Lastly, I want to mention the Innovation Hub. In fact, something I would say in the second or third meeting, the chief himself raised, and something he felt particularly was important and very committed to. And the Innovation Hub is important for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the very nature of innovation is about disruption. It's about changing the status quo. And so any organization that has the ability to innovate, iterate, and evolve will be an organization that will truly be modern for every time. And so the Innovation Hub represents not just an opportunity for today, but a sustaining opportunity for tomorrow. The other piece it does is it also ensures that we are able to keep pace with what is going on around us. And so that is built in to this work as well, and part of one of the sustaining pillars for success. Accountability. As I said, that was an area that we did hear quite a lot about. You'll know that in the report, the first report, we talked about active accountability, not just passive accountability where you're reporting only and responding to. A dynamic, ongoing accountability mechanism and structures and behaviors for today and tomorrow. And so we've built a 3-level accountability structure in this regard. For the board and the chief, in particular, the modernization outcomes. Governance kinds of outcomes that are critical, and ones that really are about that vision and those principles and goals being attained. Measurement of culture is a component to this, and this is groundbreaking, and I'll come back to it in a second. Service excellence. So much of what you have been receiving from this service for many years is about service excellence. Every organization needs to have key performance indicators that it follows, that it benchmarks others against themselves, and ultimately drives its performance by having those indicators go up or down depending on the measure. And so we have ensured that we do not lose that. That is a strength for us, and that can continue to be built out. But one thing that we will be doing is making that more transparent. Lastly, there are 32 recommendations contained in this report, and so it's important to have a progress report, one that allows us to document and watch the evolution and change occurring through the various interventions that have been built out. And so that is also contained. But I want to now specifically draw your attention to each of these. The Modernization Outcomes Report, as I said, is really a governance level report. I want to draw your attention to 3 things. The first thing that we've done is to actually put side by side those measures that our community should be looking towards and those measures that the members should be looking towards. And to ensure that we can actually see both sides of that equation. Because as you heard Greg say in his reporting back on the consultations, there's so much where there is alignment, but there are gaps where the perceptions are different. And so we need to keep that sight line on how we look at information, and that's what we've done here. But secondly, and most importantly, you will see embedded as a first generation 2 key questions about, firstly, is the service delivering on the promise of modernization as defined by things like accountability, transparency, and so on? And secondly, do you actually believe that the culture has changed or is changing? And by tracking those 2 metrics from those 2 constituencies, you can then see the perceived or real gap in how things are being viewed. And that allows you over time, as you are implementing the report with the series of interventions and keeping account through the other scorecards, you can track either the coming together or not. And it creates an ability to actually measure cultural change. I said groundbreaking because we believe that this is something that will be used by other services and not just policing services, other services, be they private or public sector. Next slide. Service excellence, I won't spend so much time here. Again, I think very much when I've seen the business plans of the board and as we reviewed that previous work, so much of that is already embedded in what you have been doing. And so we are just encouraging you to continue to look at that and to keep that in your sight line, but also to ensure you're asking the questions, are you measuring what matters? And are you elevating your performance year after year after year? And lastly, the process. Contained in the report is the first report of how we're doing. It's the baseline. It tells you on every recommendation in the first report what it's about, the progress to date, what you should expect in the next 90 days, and what you should expect beyond that, and our best advice right now, with what we knew, on when you can expect some completion to occur. There are a couple of in there, a couple of recommendations where there's ongoing, they don't actually end, but you'll get a sense of that as you go through it, I believe. And this really does 2 or 3 things. Number 1, It creates the sense of forward momentum and the constant bifocal nature of cultural change today and tomorrow, today and tomorrow. And so we believe that will be, again, a different way to go about implementation than has been previously done. Secondly, the progress report really does allow for, I believe, an opportunity for input and engagement, because you're giving a sense of where one is going in the future. And so people can start to get ahead of this. They don't have to wait. As Greg said, it's not tabling something and then there's the dialogue. You're actually building it as you go. And lastly, this will also be available online transparently, and the public can track our progress each and every day, not just quarterly, but that report card on a quarterly basis will be available until the next update is. In the next 90 days, the report covers so many things that you should be expecting, whether you work in the organization or you are serviced by it outside. The detailed implementation plans will continue to be refined. That next report card on progress, you should see those words changing. You should see activities being checked off and new ones emerging. There's a cultural assessment that will begin. One of the things that we know as a team, as we've worked together, and we've heard time and time again from others, is you cannot dictate culture. You cannot tell somebody how to behave, what the norms of any organization is or are. So this cultural assessment really begins that very important dialogue internal to the organization on what is that culture we wish to have? Where do we want to get to with respect to our service? And the report guides in so many ways around the words. I take you back to the roadmap and the spirit and the behaviors that are contained in so much of what is written on page. And so with that assessment, again, gaps will be found and strategies need to be developed. Progress reports on lifeguards, crossing guards, and paid duty, which are some of the earlier initiatives that will be realized in 2018. And then a continued focus on fiscal responsibility, not just about saving money, but also about that new model has to, with it, come that accountability at the front line for the resources, and again, not just financial resources, but the people resources that people are charged with protecting and mentoring.
So what can the service members expect moving forward? I've already mentioned that following this presentation, a very intense outreach, internal outreach begins. And we're very excited about that because, like I said, we've never done that before. As the Strategy Management Office takes the torch from the task force and moves forward, we will be building on those baseline implementation plans that are in the final report and really coming up with concrete plans and timelines, and then also uploading those online in that same fashion to be transparent to everybody.
So, a couple of last thoughts. First and foremost, on behalf of the entire task force, we just want to thank this board for appointing us. I can't say we always felt that way, but in truth, it has been just a great honor to be part of this process and a privilege to serve both our city, but also to be part of something that we believe is very special. And this moment in time where we can really change our trajectory as both a service and as a community. Secondly, on behalf of the external members or volunteer members, I do just want to first say thank you to the chief and his unbelievable patience with us in those early days as we were getting up to speed, but also his absolute engagement to debate the tough questions, to challenge us to think differently, and to accept that challenge back when we asked you to think differently. And to the members, and there are so many of you in this room that we have worked with, the same holds true for you. The challenges, the debates, and the alignment that we created as we opened ourselves up to what was possible And so on behalf of all of the volunteer members, I want to thank the service at large and the leadership at large. It hasn't always been an easy journey. This is a complex change in a complex city, but it is necessary. And with that, there have been bumps along the way. There have been heated debates. There have been challenges that we've issued to each other as we've worked our way through this, just like any group coming together would have as you learn about what is possible. But what I can also share with you as we've gone through this journey, there has been that moment where you move from being a task force, a moment in time, to something that actually has momentum to continue well beyond you. And so I see our Superintendent Bergen over there. He's the guy with the mustache. He has been working with us in the background over the last couple of months, assembling that team I talked to you about around capacity, beginning to build that momentum, thinking through what happens tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that. And he reports directly to this chief, and he and his team will now take it from here. And I want you to know we have a high level of confidence that that will happen. But that doesn't mean it won't be without its moments, mistakes maybe, missed opportunities. But what we really wanted to share with you was this important truism when making change. It's hard. There are going to be moments where all of you feel uncomfortable. There's going to be that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach as you're hearing voices all around you. It's actually in those moments that the greatest change can occur. And our ask of you is to think it through very carefully, seek the expertise you need, and move forward, not backwards. Move through those barriers of change, not ignore them. And we believe if you do that, and if you trust as we have trusted those around us in developing this, and as we have challenged those around us in those right moments, we believe that the momentum will continue far beyond the 3-year scorecard that we've built out, but for decades to come. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. We very much appreciate the honor to serve.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Greg. But maybe we could just ask the members of the task force and the advisors to stand. We've got a number of them here. But if you would be kind enough just to stand for a minute or wave, if some are standing already, but thank you. Thank you very much. Greg, do you have something?
So before we move on, we're just going to show a quick video that we've developed.
We have some depositions that we'll take, but show the video first, and then we'll do the depositions, and then board members, there'll be questions, okay? Shoot.
In 2017, we're changing our playbook on policing in the City of Toronto. The foundation for change is built on trust and partnership, plain and simple. I believe the best way to do this is to listen to the communities we serve and the people who deliver that service. We have spent the past year doing just that, listening. It's helped us to appreciate the complex needs of our city and acknowledge that each neighborhood is unique. A recurring theme from those conversations was a desire to see more officers directly connected to the communities they serve, and by modernizing the service, my officers will do just that. In the coming months, you'll start to see some changes, including more neighborhood safety officers. Hand-picked, highly trained, and dedicated, these officers will be embedded in your neighborhoods for years, not months. They will have the full support and resources of the Toronto Police Service, one of the most respected law enforcement agencies in North America. I want my men and women where the public needs them and when they need them. On the ground, doing what we do best, keeping Toronto safe.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you very much. If I could ask you just to step away for a minute, but don't go too far. We've got, I think, 3 depositions, And I'll remind the people that you have 5 minutes, and starting, Mike, with you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Board, Chief. Thanks for having us this afternoon for this deputation. We just got the Transformational Task Force report, and we're very interested in what it contains. We will be pouring through it in the next couple of weeks and months, and we would look forward to getting some of the data that you base these recommendations on, and we will definitely have some comments and positions around the Transformational Task Force report. Sitting beside me, this distinguished gentleman is Kirk Griffith. He's from the School of Criminology at SFU. He's the coordinator of Police Studies program, and we're going to make a short presentation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the...
Yeah, just push the... Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to make some comments and observations today in this deputation. We'll be speaking about recommendation number 22, which related to the parking enforcement unit, but it's a kind of for example. I think that the key factors here in any sort of transformation process in a police service are two key principles, and that is that they must be evidence-based and they must be based on best practices. The recommendation to outsource or privatize the policing enforcement unit, for example, seems to be put together without a cost-benefit analysis, limited evaluation, although the KPMG report, which the TTF report seems to be largely based on, called for an evaluation of the parking enforcement unit, and so did the TTF itself in its interim report. I think it's important to remember when we talk about transformation of police service that there are quantitative and qualitative dimensions to policing. Not everything that police services do or police officers do fit into an Excel spreadsheet. So I think there's a lot of aspects that are important to consider as you move forward with your implementation of these recommendations. Police services are not making widgets. They're a service. They're not a business. That being said, it is important that police services have key performance indicators and be as effective and efficient as possible, and have KPIs, as I mentioned. Another few things that we know about policing. First of all, there is a relationship between the number of police officers in a police service and its impact on crime. More specifically, the evidence is quite conclusive. If you increase the number of police officers, you drive down your crime rate, not decreasing police officers. And the other thing you get from increasing police officers is you reduce costs, you reduce criminal justice costs. The cost of preventing one homicide can run to $1 million. So we have to think about in terms of the proposal to cut police officers from the Toronto Police Service. Number one, where did that number come from? And number two, what are the implications of such a cut? Another thing we know about policing is police presence and visibility are two really important aspects of public confidence in the police. The TTF talks about a community-centric model, but I'm not sure how you square that circle with the proposed cuts in number of frontline officers. Traffic enforcement and the role of the parking enforcement unit is one component of an integrated service that's provided by the Toronto Police Service. Traffic enforcement, the parking enforcement officers are not just involved in revenue generation. It's not just a fiscal enterprise. Those officers are involved in a multifaceted role that includes prevention, response, collaboration, and customer service. And they are integrated currently into the TPS. Outsourcing or privatizing, in this case, the parking enforcement unit, you would lose those efficiencies and that effectiveness.
One minute.
Thank you. So I think the challenges of outsourcing, I would caution in terms of privatization. There are potential limitations of contracting with private security in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, in terms of governance, and in terms of training. And they would be disconnected from the overall operations of the TPS, and there would be a cost associated with that. There's a way to decentralize the parking enforcement unit, to put officers out into the divisions. You can, the initial workup that we've done looks like you can eliminate 28 positions with a cost savings of $2.9 million in terms of reallocation of staff. And then you would also generate additional monies by putting a lot of those officers on the front line working out of the divisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Mike, thank you. And look forward to, as you say, while you've had observer status at this, it's the first time you've seen the report. We appreciate that. We look forward very much to working with you to achieve the results. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just a couple. One, the presentation, the written and what was said, focused quite a lot on the parking enforcement thing.
Right.
I'm just looking at the actual recommendation, and it really speaks to some of the questions you talked about at the beginning in terms of data, and it talks about the work that's been done, I guess, up to December 31st, getting information, scoring, legislative reviews, and then it talks about the next 90 days conducting best practice discoveries, and then goes on to talk about transitions of services as appropriate heading off to 2019. And if I were to acknowledge that the model you talk about in here, which is one that sort of reorganizes management and restructures and so on, is one that is worthy of looking at, I presume you would also acknowledge that looking at other models is something that is, I guess, worth doing in the context of seeing if we can do it better.
Absolutely, and I think you could do that with all 24 recommendations. From my perspective, having spent 3 decades working with police services and looking at these kinds of issues, that's generally done early on. It's generally done to inform the initial recommendations, and then you have a consultation from there. So then you have a baseline of data from which to work from. You know what is, and you know where you want to go. So I think that the challenge here is a lot of the baseline data for those 24 recommendations. I reviewed extensively the TTF interim report. A lot of them are based on the KPMG report, which is, I guess, for a generic statement, a look at policing through an accounting lens. And so I think that if you gather the data at the baseline, it's really helpful to inform the recommendations, and you have a discussion from there.
And you'll acknowledge that what it says here, for just looking at the report, the service fully assessed whether there are better alternatives to the current parking enforcement unit that will lower operating costs.
Right.
It doesn't say sell it, it just says look at alternatives. It makes mention to what some of those are.
Yeah, and I think there are alternatives, and you should explore them and cost them out. And you should also look at how you gain your efficiencies. Like it's suggested from this particular model or suggestion that you gain efficiencies by keeping the PEU attached to the TPS rather than hiving it off and putting it in a different silo. I think that could end up costing you more, not only qualitatively in terms of police presence and visibility, but also in terms of accountability, transparency. You could pay a bigger price down the line, is what I'm suggesting.
Okay. If I had one for Mr. McCormick, to make sure we leave time for others, it would be just on the engagement of others, I mean, on the board to ask you questions. It would be on the engagement of the rank and file officers for whom you speak. And I just wonder, the report and the presentation today talked about a kind of robust, process of engagement now going out to sort of figure out how some of these kinds of things can be best done. And I wanted to just get your comments on how we could maximize the effectiveness of that involvement of your members, because they are going to be key in terms of both their ideas and their buy-in to doing any modernization of the police service. Could you help us with what would be effective, in your view, to make this process work going forward?
Yeah, again, looking at this report, I have to have some discussions with my board and look at that. And, when you talk about the impact to our members, and quite frankly, the challenge is going to be for the implementation of this report when it comes to membership and the association is that this has been something that has been veiled in secrecy as far as our members are concerned. There's been a lot of misinformation. There has not been, quite frankly, an effective communication that came out of this to our members. So we just did a recent survey with our members. 71% of them were very concerned about their future, what the Transformational Task Force meant to their futures, what it meant to them, because there was a lack of information. So it's going to be very challenging. As I said, we're going to have to pour through this data. We're going to have to look at that. But given the mood of the membership right now, when a couple other significant factors that came back, when we have a membership that 52% of our uniformed people are either looking or will be looking for employment in another service, 52% would not recommend the Toronto Police Service to friends or family as an employer. I think you're going to have some challenges, but we're going to pour through this, and we're going to look at it and see what's good out of this report, and we'll challenge the things that we don't believe are good.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just one final question following on that. If you had a couple of do's and don'ts, like one of each, as far as this communication process and engagement process of your members to try and address what you just said, you know, in terms of, I'm talking about process, what we, the chief, his task force members and others, the strategy office, what would, you know, one do and one don't be in terms of how we make sure we maximize success for this?
Well, as Kurt said, we'd like to delve a little deeper, make sure we have the data, make sure the information. I'm not going to answer that right off the cuff. We're going to pour through this and look at that and look at all the recommendations, and I'm sure we can have some discussions in the future. But again, the role of the association is, you know, we're looking at it a holistic way, what's good for the membership, good for the public, and we want what's best for the membership and the public.
You might have misunderstood my question. It wasn't so much do and don't on what's in the report, but rather when we go out to consult them.
Right.
You know, don't, whatever you do, have town hall meetings, or don't, whatever you do, send a questionnaire, or do, you know, go in small groups, or do, like, I'm just wondering how, because you can probably answer that now in terms of your members and how they're best going to be engaged in this, because we want to engage them.
Yeah, and again, you know, I believe the chief and some of the uniformed people you've talked to, you have to talk to the individual members. But again, as I stated earlier, it's going to be challenging.
Colleagues, other questions? Okay. Mike, Kurt, thank you very much. Derek? Five minutes, Derek.
Miguel mentioned at the beginning of this how quiet it was in here after the protest. Not nearly as quiet as it was when I finished speaking at City Hall on Monday at the Government Management Committee, where on the agenda was the item of the administrative penalty fraud system, I call it, that the City of Toronto is trying to run by everyone here, the people. You know, the consultation we were at City Hall that Saturday. I just wanted to mention, I don't think people realize, I don't know if he's here, one of the more profound things that was said was by David Suknaki, and he was right out in the open saying that, you know, when I was first asked to be a part of this, he said no, right? And he said no on the basis that I don't want to be a part of any whitewashing. So I just wanted to say that I have to admit that I was a little miffed with you last month, Chair Pringle, because 2 months ago, couldn't make quorum. There was an item I wanted to speak on from the previous month, and an item that was slipped, walk in at the last second I didn't catch. And it wasn't on last month. So I thought, okay, you know, I'm not going to make a big deal of it. You know, the Transformational Task Force, by chance, came up the other day, like I just said, at Government Management Committee at City Hall on Monday. And it's good that, I don't know if he's still here, if Mike McCormick and that other gentleman is still here, I just want to go over what I told Government Management Committee, because there's two new board members there, that on this issue, the administrative penalty system, the Attorney General and the Government of Ontario said no to this. They decided against the system. They decided to keep things the way they are by keeping things in the court system the way things have always been, right? And that they were going to try and work with the current system we have and find more efficiencies. And I mentioned to them that Alison Jones of the Canadian Press reported on this back in May. She even had a quote from Attorney General's spokeswoman, Jenna Manone, saying as such. And I mentioned, you know, I've just been mystified. Like, like, why would the city of Toronto just keep on going down this path? It's like,
I think we really need to talk about the Transformational Task Force here. So,
but the Transformational Task Force was mentioned on that agenda. It was mentioned in the item. Okay, well, let me just ask you guys.
1 minute here.
Okay, let me guys just ask you straight out. What are the Toronto Police going to do about this? Are they just going to look the other way and let the Attorney General office get walked over by the City of Toronto?
You're making a deposition, not asking questions.
No, this isn't a deposition. This is a deputation it has to do with appointing people. Nowhere in the bylaws of this board, I've checked them, does it say that we can ask questions. I think in terms of accountability in the future, if this is Transformational Task Force, culture change, we should be able to come here and ask questions. You all take public's money, you take the public's questions. How about that for now on? I want to know if the police are going to look the other way at what is just a flat-out fraud and a breach of trust on some level about what's going on at the City of Toronto and this administrative penalty system. Like, am I lying? Am I making this stuff up? Nobody from the Attorney General, all the emails, all the tweets, nobody from the Attorney General's office, Alison Jones, Jenna Monod, nobody said, oh, Derek, stop saying that. We never said that. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's not reported in the press. I mean, Tim McGuire the other day, the union chief, I mean, he was a rapt attention. He was all ears. He's going to go tell his members about this lie by omission that's being told. Is the administrative penalty system going to be allowed by the Toronto Police? Is someone going to get arrested at the City of Toronto for this if they go through with it? I want to know. I want an answer to that question.
Okay. Derek, thank you very much for your presentation. You've been here numbers of times. You know the rules. If there's anything that the chief has heard, I think, that he wants to act on, I'm sure he will. But thank you very much for drawing this to our attention.
But it's not one of the rules that we can't ask questions. It doesn't say that anywhere.
Colleagues, any questions?
For the public record, it doesn't say anywhere we can't ask questions.
Okay. Thanks, Derek.
Do the right thing, Chief Saunders.
Final deposition, Miguel.
Can you hold my time 1 minute, please? I need to have some water. I feel really thirsty.
Okay.
This bench is very
We
heavy.
We've got a tight time frame, so we started you now, Miguel. So.
Okay, it's a bench that I'm one of my demonstrations to the board to enlighten, to educate the board. This is not the same bench that your offices wear because they have metal plates. The point I'm trying to make is we celebrate or we talk about mental illness all day yesterday, and as a person with mental illness, I know if I wear this vest, I will protect it from anyone from the police services to shoot me right here in the heart. I don't know if anywhere in the report is saying we need to stop how we train our officers in the use of firearms, because in the previous coroner's report, recommendations have made thousands and thousands of dollars spending and making recommendations. 2 days ago, we have an issue on the streets of Toronto. I'm not going to bring it back. But you need to stop apologizing for officers' mistakes. I don't know if anyone in this report is talking about termination, firing for due cause. I don't know why they're not telling the members, look, this is very simple. Torontonians are paying a high price in insurance premiums to the City of Toronto. The City of Toronto has an insurance company that pay the benefits for all members of the city, ABC's agencies. The problem is that this money comes from the taxpayers' pockets. Every time there's a court liability issue, the other court is paid by Toronto taxpayers. I don't know if anything in this report says money must come from the pocket of the police officers who committed a crime, a murder. I don't know why taxpayers had to be engaged in paying these liability issues. I wonder if someone from this board has the opportunity to review how much money we're bleeding in money that could be used for good cause. Right now we have a $91 million gap in the city budget. everybody's crying for child care spaces, nutrition programs. You know, long time ago, this should have been an essential services, those two things. Nutrition for our children and daycare for our children. However, we have a situation where this board has not been able to accommodate, to provide with the savings since the court service review. I'm going back to the court service review during the 4 years. They were talking about 10% discount. No, there's only like 1% or 2% that were able to save money for the Toronto taxpayers. Now the KPMG report also came back, and no one did. So my question to you, board members, do you really have confidence that you will be able to implement all these recommendations? Because it will require some kind of thick skin and an ability, really an ability to shut up what the comments come from the union. They say that it's going to move to another promise. Perfect. We don't need them. We don't need the bad apples. It's time to clean the house. Get rid of the bad apples that affects us at the in issues that pay. We pay insurance claims, and it's really unattainable and sustainable. And you, Mayor Torre, you know that truth. Thank you so much for your opportunity.
Thank you, Miguel.
And one last thing. No more money.
Okay.
Remember, I need to tell you, no more money. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions? Miguel? Not, okay, thank you. Michelle and Greg, perhaps you'd be kind enough to come back. And Michelle, I know you have literally about 10 minutes that you can give us, so we appreciate it and we won't abuse it, because I'm sure Greg can. Of course I did, but I wanted you to know that I recognized it. So, colleagues, you've heard an excellent, let me just say again, thank you for the great presentation, very complex issue, appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that's been done, and colleagues, you've heard the presentation. You know that we're going to we're going to hold this over to the February meeting, which is, Joanne, the 23rd, isn't it? So it's basically the 3.5 weeks that will give the public a chance to digest a significant report. But colleagues, any questions at this time of Michelle and Greg? Marie.
This is probably a question that you would answer at the end of other questions, so perhaps you'll come back to it, and I'm going to direct it to Michelle DiEmanuele. And so let me just start by thanking everyone. It was great to see how many people on your steering group were able to come today and to modestly acknowledge the huge effort, because this really is quite an epic point in time. And you made the reference that the proof is in the pudding, so I guess we're going to learn how to make pudding and see how it tastes going forward. So I think we're all looking forward to that. Not sure what flavor it will be. My question is really, it's about hindsight, and I'm also thinking that this is a model, this report, that many police services across perhaps the world, but certainly across Ontario and perhaps across Canada, will be looking at. If you had advice for them, what advice would you give other police services, perhaps other police services boards, about who are watching us closely, about how to undertake this kind of process based on what you now know, having been through it with your internal and external members?
So off the top of my head, I'd say probably 2 or 3 things. First and foremost, I do think having the complement of both volunteer and experienced service members, that was, I think, very, very important in the construction of a team to look at this issue. And so, you know, I think there are probably some services out there that have done that in the past, but I think that probably is a requisite ingredient if you really want to be successful moving forward, because fundamentally this is a public service. And just as I say that, it isn't a widget. It's a service. This is a professional services organization, and that's the lens that we've used. The second piece of advice would be that making sure that in putting that complement together, that you really are supporting them with that expert knowledge in areas that you tend not to have experience in. And so I think we were fortunate with, and I'll just speak about the volunteer members in particular, we were very fortunate to have volunteer members with steep either private sector experience, public sector experience, who had history with this community, like my colleague to the left here, who has a steep history with this community, with some of our very important groups that we heard from. We had innovation experts on our team. So I don't know if that was truly by design or if we just got a little lucky along the way. So making that by design would make more sense. And the last thing I would say, and it does relate to the mayor's comments with respect to consultation, I don't think that we certainly saw evidence across this country of innovative ways in which to engage the public and be innovative around consultations and dialogue. I'll use the word dialogue rather than just engagement, internally or externally. And when you look at other sectors, there's much more going on with respect to how to do that. And it's not just by saying social media. It's using street teams that actually go out and do those one-on-one interviews. It's using telephone town halls in a way that allows for robust information and data to come in quickly. It's using accountability scorecards to test with people. And it's using small groups of individuals to continue to co-create. And I think we got there, but that was our learning as we started to go through. And in hindsight, we had, I think, a very robust conversation on day one about that, but we weren't just quite sure how to get it going. And I think we were able to catch up. But in hindsight, our instinct there was very strong. And I think we probably have learned some things along the way.
Just a follow-up, because I'm very mindful that the deputation we had from the Toronto Police Association, who were originally, who were observers throughout the process and were in and out of it, but didn't, like many of us, see this until very late in the day sometimes today. Any recommendations on how, from your perspective as an external person, to involve the union?
So first off, I understand both chairs certainly had those conversations from time to time outside the formal proceedings, and there was an opportunity for many parts of our proceedings to attend. We had many service members, so although we've talked about the 14, there were multiple, you saw more than 14 people stand up. And so, you know, not to be argumentative, but there was a lot of engagement and involvement beyond the 14 official members of this team. That's why we had also an interim report. There's an opportunity in any life cycle of developing an idea where smaller groups of people come together to co-create, and then you keep iterating it and building it over time. And in some ways, the interim report provided such a beautiful opportunity to have those early moments of both working together and learning how to work together, which I spoke about, coming up to speed on some things, but also putting out some ideas that then could be very transparently discussed for weeks and weeks and months. And so, you know, I think we feel very proud of that process. Having said that, by our own report, we have encouraged that to continue with a greater emphasis on the internal component, because now, you know, a plan by design requires design, and the best people to design are those doing the work. And it really contemplates that, and the chief has already begun.
Michelle, I would like to thank you and the entire group, the volunteers as well as the police service members, for this excellent report. And when you look at all the 24 plus 8 recommendations, I feel the core of this is the change and the cultural change that will have to occur to accomplish these goals. So do you have any advice, do you have any wisdom, do you have any knowledge that how to go about it in a peaceful way? There's a way people used to do it before. How do you do it? How do you make them change? Because I find that the cultural change in individuals is the greatest barrier. But once you can overcome that, you can attain a lot.
So my experience has been that two or three things have to be present. First and foremost, leadership, and our chief has spoken about that in the technical briefing. Leadership matters. What happens tomorrow and how leaders in this organization model, not the perfect culture yet, because that has to still be developed, but begin to model how to move forward. And the language that is used, and the body language that is used, and the behaviors around this. You saw that video. You asked, Mr. Chair, if that video was developed externally or internally. It was the internal members that developed that. It was the leader's voice that was the voiceover on that video. That sets the tone and starts moving in the right direction. The second thing that needs to occur, that is, and I suspect if you brought a group of members in, they could talk to you right now without a lot of thought about what those irritants are about the culture, and you have to start tackling those. You have to have the courage to actually deal with things that have not been dealt with for some time. And that takes leadership as well, but that also takes partnership with those who are working with you. And Greg talked about that personal ownership that we need to feel for each other in that regard. I also believe that in public services in particular, when you are developing and creating a cultural change, that the public is an important ingredient in that. And my experience has been when you can create a vision and a belief around what is truly possible and work with the public to realize that in those moments where cultural change does get difficult, when that belief is strong and when that vision is aligned, you will have the support of those through those most difficult moments. So you have to build partnerships and allies.
Mayor Tory?
I'd like to ask a question, the same question to both of you, which is just your own assessment. And this is, we've had a bit of discussion about the most important thing, which is the culture change and about engaging the membership. Just on a sort of a practical, resource-based level, when we see things like the investigative support unit, the online transactions, the connected officers, which is going to allow them to file reports remotely, the diversion of some calls to other people like the noise bylaw people and so on. I just want to get your respective assessments, one from outside, one from inside, on how that should, because I think it's the 21st century way to do things, but it's also, I think, meant to contribute to this ability on our part to have more officers in the community and to have a community that's safer and so on, as you have some of these things done differently. And I just wanted to get your sense of assurance that you have that it actually, will allow us, I believe, to have a safer community. But I mean, I stand to be corrected if, and a community that could see more police resources kind of out there as opposed to some of this. But, I'm interested in both perspectives, but especially somebody from the outside looking at the array of resources we have and how we can sort of better use them.
Absolutely. I think that if you really look at the way that we've delineated those roles, it just makes sense. Like I said, it makes sense to our officers and our civilians, and it also makes sense to the public. And it comes down to using our resource in a much more efficient manner while enhancing the level of service. By also opening up doors to the public to, in terms of service that haven't been opened up before. Something like making an appointment to report something has never been done in our organization before. And then when you mentioned the connected officer piece, that's also a piece that when talked about amongst our service members is that's what they want. They don't want to have to be tied to their car or to a police station. They want to be out in neighborhoods. I said in June that police officers don't work in police stations, that they don't work in cars, they work in neighborhoods. They work on the ground.
Things, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, we did look and we looked in North America at the statistics around numbers and crime rates and all sorts of things. And the chief speaks much more eloquently on this, but more does not always translate into safe. And so, I think that's an important piece that the board must continue to follow and understand and ensure that we certainly took great comfort from that. But the report talks about redeploying individuals who can actually be elevating our ability to create a safer community. And so, again, and it's not insignificant numbers of redeployment as well. So we feel that gave us a great comfort level around the ability to be successful in the continuation of, what has been a good service in our estimation. But the last piece around the connectivity, because I think really embedded in your question is a caution. And the caution would be this: technology is not the be-all and the end-all. It does not, by its very nature, translate into more efficiency or effectiveness or what have you, unless really well thought out. And so, as the prototype of what the new community policing station looks like, how does the new mobile operation that is supporting the individual police officer work? That needs to be done incrementally, and many organizations think, the big bang on technology gets you farther. Our caution would be work your way there, have important off-ramps and opportunities to reflect and evaluate those moments to ensure that you're actually creating that efficiency, because you could find yourself, again, I say in the healthcare sector often, you could have a lot of shiny things and actually not have produced anything very differently, and that would be a caution for sure.
Mr. Jeffers? Yep.
This is how I'm being silenced, right? Having been part of this task force from time to time, I know it's been a daunting task at times, right? However, the operative word for me here is transformation as opposed to change, right? I'd just like your comments on the whole notion of transformation, or as opposed to change of what many consider a paramilitary organization that's steeped in tradition, roles and responsibilities governed by legislation, and so on. So you want to comment on some of the systemic barriers of implementation of change in an organization, as I said, steeped in tradition and so on,
Sure. So first off, let me just say, if I just want to add one more word to what you said, and that is, many organizations engage in business process reengineering, and I think the Toronto Police Services has a history of doing that, where they've made things more efficient and done things differently for sure. And then there's transformational change, and then there's true cultural change and paradigm shifts. And so they're all very different, and this really, I believe, this report does operate at the higher end, not the lower end of that. So when I think about the transformational component, it is really at the model level in how work will get done, which work will get done, when work will get done, and I think Greg has certainly outlined that in many ways, and that does get enabled by technology for sure. The cultural change component is all about the how, and so that really is about the behaviors and the expectations and the accountability on personal and professional accountability that you build in an organization. And so, from my perspective, when you're talking in those terms, there are probably three things that are your largest barriers, and these may not be in the exact order, but I think they're pretty close. First and foremost, leadership. If you do not have leadership, and if you are not building it out at all levels, it doesn't mean on day one you have it everywhere, but it starts at the top, and it particularly has to start at that frontline leadership, because the manager is the message. The manager is your most important translator of what is happening on the front line upward, and also what you need to have happen throughout the organization. And so, as you know, there's a human resources strategy, training and development, et cetera, that we've really talked a lot about, and that talent management piece. You have to pay a lot of attention there, because if you don't, you'll stop. You'll end up stopping because you can't get through that. The second barrier to change is often the pace of change. that you move too fast or too slow. You move so fast that you actually make mistakes. And we talked a little bit about technology as an example. You move so fast that people actually aren't able to absorb it and then move, internalize that and move forward in a productive way, and can actually become quite paralyzed by that. You move so slow that those who are your greatest champions, those ambassadors in this room and in other places of the service, they become defeated and worn down because they can't get going. And you begin to let the old culture take hold after you've announced your desire to change it. And so that becomes the second barrier. I would say the third barrier from a public service context is always that public-facing nature of the work, because, and I'll, without going in, to details of an event this week, but there are always going to be those moments as you're trying to get to that next level and you're trying to make that change where some of that other culture is still there and is apparent. So it almost looks like you are disingenuous to a degree. Now, at some point, that does have to be the exception, not the norm. But that is something I always worry about when thinking about public sector organizations. And lastly, if you do not engage and if you do not create belief that this is going to be a better outcome, people will not follow.
Colleagues, other questions? Marie?
I can't resist, because I know this will be the last time that we have you both up here in this specific context. This is about the scorecard, which we haven't paid a lot of attention to in this part of the meeting, which I really think has the potential to allow us all to be as accountable as possible. This is about your favorite item on the scorecard. Like, is there one part of this, or perhaps it might be a bigger piece, what's the piece of the scorecard that you're most interested in seeing play out in your most aspirational sense for each of you?
So from my own personal perspective, I've had the real benefit of being involved in a lot of different initiatives in our service. And that last scorecard, the modernization process scorecard, where we're actually tracking all of the detailed implementation plans to make this report a reality, is really exciting for me. I think that all the recommendations in there, I think I've stated earlier, it actually makes for a real difference in the delivery of service for both the public and our members. So to have that available and to be held accountable to that, not only on a board level but on a public level as well, I think is really cool.
The fact that you can go online right now and dig deep into that and tool yourself around, I think is really exciting for that cultural change that we were talking about and that partnership that you're trying to create with the various stakeholders. On a very personal note, I do believe that cultural piece on the modernization progress report or scorecard at the front end, I can tell you I will be doing that in my own organization. It is something I have learned in this process as we've developed it, and something that I intend to replicate.
Yeah, Greg, this is directly primarily to you, because I know that you have been involved with TPS for a while. I certainly applaud the fact that you've made community engagement a priority, and that what it means now that the community has a status, an official status, to evaluate the performance and determine culture change, because that's culture transformation. So now that a lot of the police officers are going to be open to scrutiny, so to speak, what impact do you think it may have on some of the, and I know we'll find out later on in the next meeting, but what is your sense of the reaction to that scrutiny rather than evaluation, as some would perceive it as?
So Michelle mentioned earlier about that feeling of uncomfortableness, and then only in really those instances is where you're kind of coming up with real change. And I think that we also heard in one of the deputations about the potential challenges of our internal engagement strategy. And really, what this report does is it challenges everybody in our organization to think differently. We need to think past what we do today and what we can actually do in the future. and your previous question about, the legislation and the paramilitary organization, that for many aspects governs what we do, but how we do that is up to us. And, the chief mentioned earlier, I'm going to totally steal his thunder, but he mentioned about, the concept of serving and protecting. It's serving is what we need to kind of focus on a little bit more now. And that means reinventing what we're doing. And as we go through that process, we're gonna get scrutiny. Absolutely, we will. But in each one of those points of scrutiny, we can understand how our actions affect people, and then really bring the community in as a voice at the table, because we are a service to modernize.
Michelle, again, and Greg, thank you so very much. And thank you, Michelle, for coming down today. I know it was a busy day, but congratulations again, and thank you so very much. It is all over to us, so thank you. Yeah, I know. Leave a phone number. So, colleagues, we now need a motion to receive the presentations and deputations, and then to defer consideration of the report to the February 23rd meeting of the board for further depositions and discussion and a decision. So may I have someone make that motion? Dr. Nuria, seconded. Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. And again, I want to just thank all of the members of the task force, and Mark and the service members who did such an incredible amount of work, and the external members. So thank you to everybody involved. Appreciate it. We've got one more item that has a deposition. Derek, it's you. Item number 16. This is the City of Toronto Council decision, member motion, re-examine the TPS Scout car graphics. And Derek, 5 minutes is the rule, as you know. Thank you.
I invoke Section 2.B of the Constitution that protects my freedom of expression that is guaranteed again by the Constitution. You're a good guy, Chair Pringle, I like you. It's just nothing makes me more crazier than being interrupted by a public servant of mine when I'm speaking, so.
Sorry, about what?
What's that?
Nothing makes you...
Nothing just bothers me more than when I'm interrupted by a public servant of mine when I'm speaking. It's happened before down at City Hall, and I'm never going to get used to that.
I'll try to minimize it.
I'm never going to get used to that. I don't really, this is a silly item. I don't want to really talk about it all that much. I just want to say two things. Simply that I direct, out of spite to the City of Toronto, I direct Chief Saunders that from now on, any new police cars he rolls out are to be painted the same color as the Batmobile from now on. I know. Hey, this is a serious issue, Miguel. I know the City of Toronto and Councillor Thompson are worried about the militarization of the dark silver cars. I'm not quite sure how they square that, but I just want to make sure that when Chief Saunders does that, there's no grappling hooks, there's no machine guns that pop out of the hood, and there's no flamethrowers. And two, that if Councillor Thompson really took the time and trouble and made such a big deal about this, given Chief Saunders the gears and all the flack over this item, then I would like to think that Councillor Thompson can also go to the time and trouble and go to the lengths of making a report to Chief Saunders on the $1.4 million unauthorized spending fraud that I heard him stand up and talk about a few months ago at City Council. I haven't heard about that, like if that's being reported to police, but I just want to encourage Councillor Thompson that, like my Aunt Judy used to say, I can't stand people like that. They can do this, but they can't do that. She's no longer with us, but I just can't stand people that just do this and do that for whatever it's convenient for them. So if Councillor Thompson can do this, he can report the $1.4 million unauthorized spending scandal that he talked about to Chief Saunders.
Derek, thank you. Any questions of Derek? If not, thank you. I think we'll just go on with item number 16. That was, with that, if there are any discussion, colleagues, if not, a motion to approve. Item number 16. Councillor Lee, Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. That takes us back. Marie, you wanted to hold item number 8, I think, didn't you? Microphone? Sorry, you're not working.
I would like to read the questions that are in the written deposition from Mr. Sewell for this item, which is about the use of the internet procedure, and I expect that the service, if they can't answer it today, would be able to do so in short order. So he's looking for where he can find the documents which are referenced, including the police service procedures, the acceptable use agreement, information security manual, and terms of use. He says he was unable to find those on the website, it was directed elsewhere, and has had some difficulty. Thank you.
Chief Saunders, is that something that you can answer?
Item 8 in the letter, the 8.1
Yeah, so
written
all he's
submission.
saying is, in the answer that the chief has come back with, where do I find the documents you're referencing?
Because it appears that he did seek that answer from within the service, and it didn't give him what he wanted. Thank you.
We'll look into it.
Okay. Thank you. With that, then, may I have a motion to receive item number 8, that report? Ms. Mulliner, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? And then item number 13, again, Maria, that was you wishing to...
Yes, so
Hold
this is the item, the internship agreement, unpaid student and co-op student placement. I do not object to the idea of having interns. I think that's a very important part of any knowledge transfer and especially for large institutions that can carry that role. I am concerned about the unpaid nature of these internships, and I appreciate that it's legal. I appreciate that it happens elsewhere. It's on a point of principle, given how precarious employment is generally, how precarious employment is amongst the youth sector, that I would object to, and I will not support an internship agreement that does not pay at least minimum wage for participants. So I'm not sure that that's worth discussing, because that's not what the issue was today. It was whether or not this was a legal model, which I understand it is. Thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, recognizing that, Marie, it's an old discussion that's been going on for a while. We have it over the walrus, too, and it's, couldn't provide, et cetera. So that is item number 13. Is there a motion to approve or further discussion on, first of all, in Marie's point?
It has been around for a long time, and I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, given how much is going on and how much work there's due. So I will take advice from others about whether they want to engage on whether or not it's appropriate for the Toronto Police Service to have unpaid interns, but it's not a question. I'm just making the point today.
But you're not
Thank
going to
you.
vote in favor of the motion
Correct.
because you don't agree that they should be unpaid
Correct.
interns. You made that very clear. I understand that. We still have to either approve or send this back. Okay. Councilor moved by Councilor Lee, seconded by Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Any contrary? I'll record the one vote contrary. Thank you very much. That is approved then. That, I think, Deirdre, is the agenda. Thank you very much, colleagues. Chief, thank you. Is there any other business that people wish to bring up? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn? The Councillor Lee, seconded Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Carried. And thank you very much, everybody.